Hi, Jan. Welcome to Revitalized Womanhood.
Thank you. Glad to be here, I think.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good thing. I had my mom on, and I told all my listeners that I was really excited that when I first started this, that you and my mom were the first women that I thought about, and I wanted you to tell your story here.
Oh, I do have a story.
You do. I wonder, you know what? I wonder if... Get our sound. Everybody knows my studio's set for one person, so when I try to set it for two, it's quite cozy. We get all cozy in here.
I don't mind being cozy.
No, I don't mind being cozy with you either. Kelly's one of the, not first people, but one of the most recent people to say that she's jealous of our relationship. She says, that's your mother-in-law? That's so lucky that you get to have someone that's more like a friend, right?
Yeah,
that gets you treat more like a friend. And I said,
nice.
Oh yeah, I call her about everything. Whether she likes it or not.
About everything too. So we kind of bounce off each other a little.
Yeah, it works. So I would love for you to tell me about you, Janice Benson. I want you to take us back to when you were a young girl being raised by Grandma and Grandpa in Parowan, how that was, what that looked like, a little bit about your family. You have such fun stories. Like riding the horses everywhere and
yeah, some of those stories. I was lucky enough to grow up in a small town in southern Utah, Parowan, Utah. And I tell my husband that I grew up in God's country because it was a wonderful place to grow up. I have two sisters and one brother, and we spent most of our life in Parowan growing up there. And went to Parowan High School, and because it was such a small school, we got to participate in all kinds of activities, from FFA to cheerleading to dance, the drill team. And I had uncles that taught me in school, and it was just a small community that took care of each other, each other's children, each other's, and if you were on Main Street and saw one of your mom's friends there, you knew that she was going to tell Mom that you were not in school that day, or it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I had one of my very best girlfriends, Sherry Guffey, and I still call her Sherry Guffey, even though she's Sherry Serrano. And we used to go and we would ride horses. And one day we decided that we were going to ride past all of the football players on the football team that were down practicing. So we got on this horse that I had that's name was Shorty. And we didn't have a saddle. We were just riding bareback. And we thought we were going to show off for all of these big hunks, at the football practice, and we got trotting along, and Sherry started to slip to the side, and as she slipped to the side holding on to me, I also started slipping to the side, and we ended up hanging from the neck of the horse in front of all the football players.
That did not work the way you wanted it to work out.
And luckily...
Go ahead, keep going. I'm just looking at my phone.
Okay. Luckily, the horse had enough sense to not step on us or let us drop off. We were just hanging there, and that definitely did not work out like I thought it would. We thought we were going to impress these guys riding bareback and galloping through the field, and no.
And most of them are ride horses too, so they probably just sat there thinking, what is going on?
What are you doing? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we used to, for my 16th birthday, we went out into the fields to a pond that was called Bringhurst Pond by the North Hills, and we had an ice skating party. And we burned tires for heat, which is not okay anymore. No. But we had, my whole class was there. My big class of 52 people was there, and we had an ice skating party with marshmallows and hot dogs, and it
Were you cooking them over the fire, burning the tires?
I don't remember that, but we probably were. So that explains quite a few things. And we could just, we had sleepovers at night at someone's house where we ran all over town all night long. It was we knew everybody in town. We were all friends, and it was an awesome place to grow up.
That's a perfect segue into the one question I have, but I don't know that I want to go into Rick yet. I want to talk about what you remember from being the oldest and a girl in your family, and how that was being raised by grandma and grandpa, and what that looked like for you in that family setting.
My mom and dad were married when they were very young, 16 years old.
16.
And they were married until my father passed away. And, every marriage has their ups and downs, and of course they did too. Yeah. And I can remember I was the oldest. I had a younger sister, and then a brother, and then another younger sister. And we spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, my Ivan and Selma Robb. We spent a lot of time there. We had cousins. It was always, Thanksgiving was unbelievable. Probably 60 people there, and chaos, and it was awesome. My grandma made homemade bread, and we'd eat bread and butter and sugar when we stayed there. It was really good. But with Mom and Dad, they were young, and they were pretty inexperienced with raising kids when I came along. They got lots better through the years, and of course, you know how good they were with grandkids.
Yeah. Absolutely.
They, for a long time, Dad had a temper. He had a very bad temper, and so we were very careful. With my husband now says, I don't remember my mom and dad ever checking to see if my homework was done, or if, boy, my dad checked to see if my homework was done. And it was straight A's, or you got to sit down and do homework with Dad, which was not fun.
Yeah.
If he told you something and you didn't remember it, he'd say, we've done this, we've gone over this, you know this. And I was going, well, obviously I don't, but I will tell you that I know it.
I'm going to pretend.
Yeah. And Dad's temper brought us kids closer together because we would look out for each other.
Yeah.
So, and Mom, we used to think that Mom would stir Dad up. I wasn't allowed to ride in cars with anybody until I could drive myself. Didn't matter who it was. I lived close to the school, so I could walk home. And I remember one time I got in a car with a guy that was probably 2 years older than me, but not for any other reason than to get a ride home from probably 4-H. His mother taught me 4-H. And my dad went bonkers. He came looking for me, dragged me out of the car, and I was going, whoa, this is not anything that was fun for me. It was just a ride home. It wasn't like I was going to hang out with this guy or anything, but I don't know if Dad was, because he was so young and had recently known what could happen with boys and girls, then he was very protective, and I never got in a car with someone again until I was 16 years old and had permission.
Yeah, and those boys, they probably told some stories. I know those boys and who Grandpa was being raised around, and I'm sure there were stories about boys in cars with girls.
Yeah, he was very protective, and you did not want to get him angry.
And he was very protective of his image, right? Mm-hmm. He was very respected and very...
Absolutely.
He never missed a day of work in his entire life.
Yeah, he often worked several jobs. He was a sheriff or a deputy sheriff at the same time that he was working at the mine, and he would go to school for chemistry and stuff at the college while he was working. Most times my dad was working a couple of jobs and did very well with it. He like you said, he never missed work. He had a strong work ethic, and a strong sense of family.
Do you feel like any of that, and I don't want to dwell on the negativity, but they were young and they were inexperienced, and things that I know Grandma, she used to hide away money. She used to have a little bit of extra cash she would hide away, and that followed her through her life. We would go in Grandma's room and there'd be cash stashed everywhere in the bedroom, like, oh, oops, I just found Grandma's little, put it back, just put it back. And do you feel like things like that from, like for me, clutter, I have a really hard time with clutter because we had 8 kids and the house was always hand-me-down clothes and clothes trying to go to the DI and things trying to be patched. I mean, it was just, there was so many of us and so much stuff everywhere, and food and being preparing food in the kitchen and putting food away and bottling it. And so it was just always everything everywhere. So for me, it triggers me. I have a very hard time with clutter. So did things come from that? Do you feel like that into you raising your children? And maybe you went the opposite way?
I do like to, my family says I'm somewhat of a hoarder, and it's because I believe that we didn't have a lot of stuff. So, and living in New Harmony, you don't just run to a grocery store. So I made sure that I had sugar, brown sugar, everything that I would think I might need, especially if I have family coming or something. I like to know that I've got everything that I need there. My kids tease me about cake mixes.
I know. They're such brats.
Yeah.
This woman prepares everything for us, meals, everything, when we go on camping trips, when we go on to family reunions, we go anywhere, she comes with, and they give her the hardest time. She brings totes and totes and totes full of everything you could possibly imagine. And then we get to camp and it's belly aching that Kendall had to drive it up, help you load it, and then everybody
help load.
Well, had to make room for it.
Yes.
Everyone gives this poor woman the hardest time, and we have never once gone hungry.
No.
We have never once thought, oh, I want something, and then I think, oh, it's probably in the tote, and I get it.
And my response to them is, if I don't have it, you can complain. If I have it, you don't complain.
Yeah. Or just don't eat it.
Yeah.
Go ahead and don't eat. Complain and don't eat anything.
Before. Quite often when they get going.
I think that is a common thing from your era to be a little bit of a hoarder, because you never know when the next thing, and right now that is doomsday things right now. It's get your food storage in order and be prepared.
And the church has always said that. My religion has always said 2 years supply. Went down to 1 year supply, but to have stuff in case you ever can't get it, which I think a lot of people in the world right now have seen what happens when the shelves are empty.
Yeah. Just from this pandemic. And that's a pandemic. That's not even a war. That's not even something really, really is shutting down these supply lines like it's not coming again. Yeah. It's
absolutely
just delayed.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is going to be really hard for you to talk about, but I really want you to talk about, because I love the story about you and Rick. It is the all-American story of boy meets girl.
It was funny because
I know, sorry, I don't have, I need Kleenexes here.
We met, I was in 7th grade, and Rick was in 9th grade.
Oh, I do have some.
And we were at, in a humanities class, I believe. We were learning folk dancing for the Perwin City birthday. And there was this big, strong, handsome fellow, and I got to dance with him. And so it's fine. I'm not a pretty crier anyway. And that was when I was, what are you in 7th grade?
In 7th grade.
5 and 7, 12 years old, 12 or 13 years old.
Holy cow.
And my mom and dad, of course, you know the story about not being able to get in cars and stuff. Well, I had a grandma that was awesome, because Rick decided that he would like to see a little bit more of me, and he was going out with another girl at the time, and he was the only boy that wasn't our religion in town, and rode motorcycles, and he was a little bit of a hellion.
Oh, great. The James Dean of heroin.
That might have been what drew me to him. I've always kind of gone for the hellions. But my grandma would come and get me. My mom and dad didn't want me to go with Rick at all, and for sure not until I was about 16. But my grandma would come and get me, and we would go down to the elementary school and meet Rick. And me and my grandma and Rick would sit in the car and talk and visit. And years later, my mom said, that's the thing that made me believe that everything was going to be all right when I married him and started moving with the military and stuff, was that Grandma loved him as much as I loved him. And she trusted my grandma.
Yeah.
And so we dated for, well, from 16 to, we got married when I was 18 and he was 19. I did not have to have a signature, and he did have to have his parents' signature. I used to tease him about that. He was actually 2 years older than me, so he was probably 20. He had gone into the military, and actually we dated for quite a while in Parowan, and he was on the football team, and he was a wrestler, and we'd find ways to ride home on the same bus, or, you know, so we got to be pretty close. And then he joined the military, and we were planning on getting married, but I hadn't told my mom and dad yet, because he had given me a ring when he came back from Salt Lake one time, and my little brother that was kind of a shit, I was showing it to showing it to my sister, and he came down and saw it, and I knew there was going to be a battle. And so he went up and told Mom and Dad that I had a ring down there.
Oh, boy.
And so Mom and Dad came down, and I says, and Sherry had slipped me a Cracker Jacks ring. And I says, it's not a real ring. It's just this, you know, it's not, yeah, we've talked about it. Yeah, we've talked about getting married and stuff, but it's not a real ring. And then they went upstairs, and I had done okay with it. And I thought, okay. And then I sat there for a minute, and I thought, you know what? I am going to marry him, and I am going to tell them. So I went upstairs, and I said, this is the ring that Mike saw, and we are going to get married. And we can get married with your permission or without your permission, but we are going to get married. When Rick comes home on leave, we are getting married. And my mom and dad were not happy for a while, but they did grow to love him. They jumped right in with the reception, with the wedding, with everything. Rick and I were married in a temple, and we had a reception in Parowan with, oh man, I had to have had at least 6 or 8 bridesmaids, and he had his brothers there, and it was a very nice time. And then we were in the military, and when Rick had gone to his recruiter and said, this is my MOS, this is what my job is in the military, is there any place that I could get sent that my wife couldn't go? And the recruiter says, well, of course there's Vietnam. You know, that war was going then. He said, and I says, yeah, I don't really want to go to Vietnam anyway. And he says, but there's no other place any other place she could go. And so we said, okay. So he kept writing me saying, I haven't got my orders yet. I haven't got my orders yet. I'm looking for them. They should be coming anytime. And finally, just before we were married, he got the orders, and it was for South Korea. And so I went down to the Army recruiter in Cedar City, and I said, this is what we have orders for. And he says, oh, you can't go there. That's a non-command sponsored tour. He'll be there for 13 months, and you can't go. And I says, oh yeah, I can go. You told me I can go anywhere, and I am going to Korea. And so we went to Korea. A couple of different times we went to Korea and lived. It wasn't command sponsored, so you couldn't be on base with the other Americans and stuff. So we lived in the village, and it was awesome. It was awesome to be out in the middle of those people. The first time that we were there, I was pretty homesick, but it's kind of funny because we were stationed in El Paso several times, in Michigan, in New Jersey, in Alaska, and in Korea. Those are the places that we went. And when I was stateside, I would get so homesick. I wanted to go home and see my family. When I was in Korea, I knew I couldn't go home. So,
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that why? Because you kind of feel like when we travel, it is that way. You kind of feel like it's an easy thing to be home.
Yes.
And we're missing things. You kind of feel like you kind of are there, so you feel like you're missing things. But when you are in a whole nother country, you are completely cut off. You're not thinking about family because there's no one here that looks like you. There's no one here that talks like you. There's no one, so you are completely cut off from it. So you kind of just don't think about it.
Yeah, you don't get homesick like you do when you think it's a 2-hour, 3-hour flight from El Paso home, or it's a 16-hour flight from South Korea home. It's like, no, that's not. And we were poor. We were living on income that qualified GIs for food stamps, which is pathetic in itself.
Yes.
And so you just knew you weren't going home. Yeah.
I remember, Rick, we would fight. I've talked about this on here, that we would get in these huge fights in these different countries. And it was like, the one that was the worst was in New Zealand. And we were there and we got in this huge fight. And I mean, we were getting a divorce. It was, it was awful. I mean, we've called you for every single one, I think. And Rick left and he was in the car and he says, I got in the car and went, well, what am I going to do now? Get on an airplane and fly across the world without my family
and leave
my family?
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
And so I think it does make you think, you're who I'm stuck with.
Yeah.
We're going to figure this out.
We've got to be committed here because there's no place that, Rick and I remember one time when we were over in Korea and I had gotten some fish in a fishbowl and it was on the table. And I think we got in a fight about him not going to church with me. And he smacked that fishbowl and broke it. There were fish flopping all over.
Oh my heck.
I was going, oh, and I was furious. And it's like you said, you get over it because
what else are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Gather up the fish, put it in a pot. And
move in with the Korean down the street.
Although there were some really nice Koreans there. We had such good people that we met over there. It was a lot of fun. The first time that I was there, I took, there was a couple in Japan that were adopting a baby that had been found in a hotel there. She had actually been in the hotel for a day or two before someone found her. And so she was not able to tolerate formula and stuff. We had to start her on Pedialyte and liquid, clear liquids and stuff. And they wanted to adopt her and they needed someone in the country to take care of her until she could leave the country with them, with the adoption being final. Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'm over here and I don't have a lot to do and I'll take this little girl.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided that you can love babies.
Oh, absolutely.
I could have kept this little girl. When her parents came to get her, it was just her mom that came to get her. And of course, Laura, the little girl's name was Laura, and she didn't know this lady. And she came in, and her and I were pretty close, Laura and I. And this lady came in, and she says, she went to take her, and Laura cried and cried. She did not want to go with her. She did not want to have anything to do with her. I might have spoiled her a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
And
As we do with our first child.
yeah. And so the lady said, Susie was her name. She says, I'll be back in the morning to get her. And when she left, I said to Rick, I says, geez, if this baby acts like that when she comes to get her, I don't know if I can just hand her over and let her go. And he says, well, what are you going to do?
Keep her?
You can't get her out of this country because she's being adopted by these other people. And I says, surely we could think of something. But luckily, the next morning, the mom came to get her, and she was asleep and was able to take her with. Yeah. Yep. So.
Easier, but not without its
she was my baby. I'd had her for 9 months. I was going,
Yeah, that's so hard.
Yeah.
I think every mother just felt that, every mother can feel that feeling. And that is why you said it just like that. It's adoption. It's, you will love that baby. Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, so when did you go back with Jeremy? You were pregnant in Korea.
Right. I went back with my oldest son. We had him in Michigan, and Rick got orders for Korea again. And I said, yeah, here we go. We're going to Korea.
So Jeremy
again.
was 3?
Jeremy was probably about 1.5 years, 2 years old when we went. And I got pregnant with Kimberly over there. They're about 3 years apart, so it was 4 years, Mm-hmm. But we lived in and I was so sick with morning sickness. And Korea has a lot of smells to it. They have their fertilizer for their crops and stuff are called honey buckets. They pump septic tanks and use, and I don't know, this has been what it was in 1974 and 75 and again 1972 and again in 1975 that we were there. And so things have probably changed a lot, but this was my experience with Korea. There was all of this that was being used for fertilizer. Matter of fact, they told us when we were shopping, we did have PX privileges that we could buy stuff on base. We just couldn't live on base. And they said, do not buy any vegetables, any fruit, anything like that you cannot peel. If you can do, watermelon is good, potatoes if you can peel them, but anything that you cannot peel, you cannot eat.
Yeah, you can't clean it enough.
No, because it's grown with the honey buckets.
Yeah. And you were sick, and they were trying to give you the cure.
Well, we were allowed
the regional
to go
cure
to the hospital, but I went to the hospital. I got pregnant, and with all of my kids, I've gotten sick enough with morning sickness that I ended up with IVs and throwing up blood because
your esophagus
so
is
much
burned.
Throwing up, and so I knew I was pregnant because I was sick. And I went to the hospital at Yongsan, and they said, can't get a positive pregnancy test. And I said, I promise. And so a girl that I knew that was there on base, another American, had been going down to Seoul to a doctor there. And so I says, you know what, I'm going to try it. I am so sick. And so down we went to the doctor, and they said, sure. We'll give you some medicine. And I thought I was okay. When they take your blood, it was with one needle that they would draw blood, and then they would wipe it off, and then the next person would come in and they'd draw blood with that needle again and wipe it off. And, these people are so poor, and
they are.
So that they didn't have the technology and stuff, even refrigerators and stuff, you bought fresh food because there was no refrigeration. It would spoil if you didn't. It was like stepping back in time 100 years.
Yeah.
It was made me appreciate the United States and and all of the conveniences. Matter of fact, when I had Laura the first time, we had to use cloth diapers with her. And oh my gosh, to hand wash on scrubbing boards, cloth diapers.
Because cloth diapers here is one thing, because you have your bleach buckets and your toilets and your washing machines.
No, this
you
is...
don't in Korea. You have a stone that you're washing
It's a
it on.
board, actually, a scrub board, but you pile them in these big brown buckets until you have to do some diapers because it was such a chore. And scrub them and the ammonia smell and everything. It was rough. I swore I'd never complain about washers and dryers again. But, of course, I came home and I got conditioned to...
We do. I remember even just thinking, like you said, washer and dryers, because we'd be in these other countries and no one has a dryer.
Yeah.
No one. That's just silly. Everyone line dries everything. And I enjoyed it. And washing dishes. No one has a dishwasher. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed doing it, but I thought we get so used to these conveniences and we think we need to have everything. And there's so many people that look at us like, why? Why do you think you need to do that? And that, I think, is a huge difference in back when you were being raised and you did have to do these things versus our kids, and we're trying to get them to do chores and they don't feel like they need to. They feel entitled, like everything should just be done for them. Everything should just be handed to them because they do have all of these conveniences.
Absolutely. And we want our kids to have that
more.
But I think we do them some harm.
We do.
Yeah,
I do.
With that. But it was, yeah. So here I was pregnant. And actually at one point we lived in a house out in the village, and we had one day a young man, while we were out and about, that came into our house and stole. I had some jewelry that a good friend of mine, a Korean lady, had given me that was smoky topaz, and he took that, and we had more than half of my money saved for our trip to go home when we were, and he took that, and the shopkeeper saw him sitting in our living room watching our television. And so he went in after him. We had the most awesome shopkeeper that lived right next door, and he went in after him, and the guy ran out the window. He did leave a library book that I have to this day, written in Korean. We took it to the police and said, whoever checked this book out has been in my home and taken stuff, and of course they didn't want to get involved with Americans and Koreans, and so for my smoky topaz jewelry and half of a airplane ticket home for me and my son, I got a Korean library book.
And at the time you were devastated, and right now you love that book. Yeah, it's an amazing story.
Yeah, it was. At the time, he had pulled everything out. It felt so
intrusive.
Yeah, he had intruded, clothes, underwear, everything had been gone through. And I was going, oh my heavens. You did not feel safe there for a while. But then we had the most amazing people around us. The shopkeeper, he had his cat tied up because there were big enough rats in Korea that he said they would kill his cat. And so one day, here we were, me and Jeremy went down the steps. We had a little basement where they kept the charcoal briquette things that they would heat the house with. Mm-hmm. And Jeremy had headed down the steps and came running back up. He was probably a year and a half, maybe by then, maybe close to 2. And there was a rat down there, and he was going to beat it with a stick, and I was going, no.
That rat's the same size as you are.
Yeah, we do not want to mess with these things.
It just reminded me of the rats off Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Rodents of unusual size.
Yeah. That, and also cockroaches. One time I got up in the middle of the night, of course, and going to the restroom or something, and reached for the light switch, which was, and the light switch went up the wall. And I was sleepy enough that I kind of went up after it until I realized that it wasn't the light switch. It was a cockroach.
Oh,
no. So it was, I've had people say, how could you stand it? And it was awesome.
And we can do hard things.
Oh, heavens. I had an apartment when we first got there that you could sit on the couch and put your feet on the wall across from you. It was like a hallway. And it was awesome. We had such a good time there. Met such good people. Really, really good people.
How was it communicating? You didn't speak Korean?
No, we didn't. But there were several Koreans that spoke just a little bit. I learned enough to get in a taxi cab and say, go to the right, go to the left. How much is this? Oma.
Yeah. You learn your little phrases.
I learned just little bits and pieces, and they were so eager to communicate. We got on when I went down to the city to get the medication. We started to say, they took me to the pharmacy, and they handed me
the powder
wrapped into triangular pieces of newspaper. And I was going...
For the morning sickness.
Yes,
this was for the morning sickness.
I was going...
For your tea? Is that what this was?
I did not take it.
Homemade newspaper wrapped tea bags?
I was going, they gave me about, 6 or 8 of them and said, this is, there was people there that were able to communicate enough that they said, this is for the sickness. And I was going, you know what? I'm going to have to wait until I can get on base and get the real thing, because I have no idea what is in these things.
I can't imagine, one, because my only time having morning sickness, it was in COVID. We were in lockdown at your ranch, at your property, on the couch, on a comfortable couch, watching Netflix, and I was miserable. I was so miserable. And there's, to this day, this salsa that Rick uses that I'm just like, get it out of my house. You cannot even, and he'll leave his plate in the sink even, and I'll walk over and be like, ugh, no. It just triggers.
It is so funny how both smells and music and some things just immediately
put you right back. I have that perfume from Barcelona that I wear it, and I was wearing it this whole week on our anniversary trip, and it instantly puts me right back to exactly where I bought it.
Yeah. It is so amazing what the mind can do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then on top of the the honey wagons that were there, they had the outdoor markets, were the fish markets and octopus and little kids running around eating these little dried squids, and I was going...
Like popsicles.
Yeah, oh my heavens. It was a smelly environment.
We had a hard time with China, Rick and I, when we were there. It was something like, I don't know if it was the sesame... There's something always in the air, and especially at the markets. Yeah. And something was just, it was. Yeah,
there's some smells that you're hard. Going, huh.
It's like an assault on your senses all the time.
Yep, it is.
So after Korea, I'm just really, I don't even feel like I need to say this to my listeners, because just from hearing all of that, it's like, we are so blessed. Mm-hmm. We are so lucky to have all the things we have and that we take for granted. And even being thankful and grateful isn't enough, right? It's not, because there are so many people that do it with less and they're happy. Uh-huh. Rick and I talked about that on our episode, is that in Tijuana, they're whether or not they're happy, but they don't have time to think about it.
To dwell on.
They can't dwell on it because they have to get food that day. Yeah. They have to get clean water that day.
They have to take care of their kids.
They have to live.
Yeah.
So they don't have time to worry about, am I depressed?
I know.
Am I sad
Isn't
today?
It so sad that if you go about living, then you live and you don't have time for.
Be intentional about looking at all the good instead of dwelling on the bad, because you're going to find bad no matter what. Well, this is where I think, we get to you living in El Paso. Mm-hmm. And this is you. I can't build up enough anyone who knows you knows that you are the happiest, smiliest, other than Kendall.
Yeah.
Kendall
Kendall will argue that.
But that's okay. You have been through so many things. And at the age of, so you were 25, you were living in El Paso with
Rick and
Rick
two children.
and two children.
And
how old was Jeremy and Kim?
Jeremy was 5 years old. Kimberly was 2 years old.
And
I was pregnant. Had just
6
started
months pregnant?
out. Well, when he passed away, Rick was born in May, so I was about 3. He died in January. So
yeah,
3
and Rick
months.
was born in May. Mm-hmm. So what happened?
There was actually, it was January, probably the 3rd. And we were trying to get our Christmas tree out. My family had just been there to visit for Christmas, and they had gone home, and I was, of course, had morning sickness again, which was one of the good side effects of this. I never had morning sickness after the day that he died, which the Lord helped me with. But Rick was not feeling good. And we had gone on base to the doctor a couple of times, and they had given him Actifed, and it was a cold. We knew it was a cold. And they had given him decongestants and stuff like that, but they didn't ever prescribe anything for an infection. And so on January 3rd, I went in to get him up, and he wouldn't wake up. And so I talked to him for a minute, and then he sat up on the bed, and I says, "Talk to me, Rick, you're scaring me. I need you to talk to me and tell me what's going on." And he still didn't talk, but he was looking at me. He was trying to put boots on, and I says, "Okay, I'm calling the doctor. Something's wrong. And you're scaring me, and I'm going to call." And so I called the doctor's office there on base, and I said, "My husband is not communicating with me. It's like almost like he can't. And he's had a cold for a few days, and I need to make an appointment for him." And they said, "Just bring him up." It was January 3rd. We don't, everybody was on skeleton staff as far as, people were taking days off and stuff for the holidays. And they says, "Bring him up and to the emergency room." They said, "Do you want us to send an ambulance?" And I said, no, we're fine. I can get him, And so I says, "Rick, you got to get dressed. We're going to go to the doctor." And so he got up and started to get dressed, went into the bathroom, went to brush his teeth, and started to fall backwards. And I caught him, and I says, "Are you okay?" And he would nod his head, but he wouldn't say anything still. And so I have anybody that's been in the military knows what a tight-knit community that is. They are so supportive. I had neighbors behind me, and they took my 2 little kids, and I got Rick in the car, and we went up to William Bowman Army Medical Center, and we checked in at the emergency room, and I remember the guy there. I says, "I think this is an emergency. He's not talking. He's not, And I remember the guy saying, "Have a seat, lady. Sometimes dying isn't enough of an emergency around here." And I says, "Okay." So I said to Rick, "Come on, hon, we got to go sit down here for a little bit. They'll call us when there's someone there." And so we both sat down, and he kept fidgeting. he'd lay his head on my shoulder, and then he'd sit up, and then he'd cross his legs, and then he'd uncross his legs, and then he'd cross them the other way, and then he'd fold his arms, and just kept fidgeting, never spoke. The only time I remember him speaking is when we went through the doors, and he saluted somebody and said, "Good morning, sir," or something like that. That was the only words that I heard him speak. And so we sat there for probably an hour or so, and then a lady that was also sitting there, a patient, or with a patient, I'm not sure, came over to me and she says, "Can I help you? Let's get him back there. He doesn't look like he feels good." And I says, "Yeah, they haven't called him yet." So we got him up, and he started to fall again. She got on one side of him, I got on the other side of him, and we walked through the doors into the emergency room behind the desk, and someone came out and said, "Can I help you?" And I says, "This is my husband. He's not speaking. He's losing equilibrium." And the guy says, "Is he on drugs?" And I says, "No, he is not. The only thing that he's had is the decongestants and stuff. We've been here a couple of times." He says, "Let me look at his record." And we took him in and laid him down on the table, and the guy that was there with him said, "Sergeant Trimmer, I'm going to take your shirt off." And I saw Rick set up, and they took his shirt off, and that was the last time he did anything consciously. And so they had me go back outside, and then they started bringing me forms. I called my mom, and I called my dad, and I called Rick's mom. First I called my mom, and I says, "I don't know if I want to call Rick's mom. I don't know what's going on, but Mom says you call her. She needs to know." And so I called them all, and unbeknownst to me, while I was still there waiting, my dad was arranging for a charter flight to bring him back to El Paso to help me. And so they were bringing me out forms that said, his heart's gone into fibrillation. We've got to shock him, and these are the side effects. And of course, they always tell you all things that could go wrong. It could stop his heart. It won't start again. It could not work, and it would just keep fibrillating. All of these things that could go wrong. And I says, "What choices do we have?" I was 25 years old and stupid. I thought, if I get him to the doctor, he'll be fine.
Yeah, these doctors should know what to do.
And they says you don't have a choice, because if we don't try something, then he's not going to make it. And so I signed the papers, and they did, and it did shock it into a steady rhythm. They were able to shock it into a steady rhythm. Still no conscious response, though. And so we went upstairs to the emergency room. They admitted him there, and there was this awesome black lady that was cleaning, a custodian. What do they call them at the hospital? Janitor, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she was so great, because every time they'd come to tell me something, which was bad news and bad news and bad news, she would help me go into the restroom, put a restroom close sign out for me, and let me have a little cry for a while until I could get control of myself and come back out. She was the nicest lady. And anyhow, they came in, and by pretty soon after that, my dad got there in the evening, and they were saying that there was no brain activity. But Rick was squeezing my hand. When I would say, "I love you," I could feel him squeeze my hand. And so Dad came, and at 10:37 on January 4th, Rick died. And we went home for the night and got the kids, and June and Rick's brother Jerry were able to get there before he died. When they asked me if I wanted to turn the machines off, I being young and stupid, I said, "Does he know what's going on?" And they said, "No." And I says, "Then keep him alive. I don't want him to be gone. We have 2 little kids, another one on the way. I need him here." And even his mother said, "Jan, you don't want to do this." And so the doctor said, "Okay, here's a compromise. We will give him enough of the life support on these machines that if he could come out of it, he will." Knowing that he wasn't going to come out of it. And I could make that decision. I couldn't make the decision to just turn them off, but if he could come out of it, then, or sustain, even breathe on his own or anything. And so I said, okay, and he didn't. So it was 10:37 on January 4th that he passed away, and it's been 42 years. And
Well, January it'll be 43.
Yeah.
So
And
it still hurts this bad.
it does. It got to where it's amazing. I can remember thinking right at first when we went home that night, and they had given me some medication to sleep, but they were concerned about the baby.
The baby.
So it wasn't very strong, and I woke up in the night, and I remember going into the bathroom, and my dad was there. My other 2 kids were there, and they were all asleep. So I went in the bathroom, I wrapped a towel around my head, and put it in my mouth, and I screamed. I felt like my body was going to fly apart. Because I think probably because we had been in the military and we had traveled together, and you have to depend on each other so much, like you said, there's nobody else there, that we were that close.
Well, and from when you met, it's this whole story, the whole story from when you met and everyone trying to keep you apart, and Grandma helping you be
fought
together, and Grandpa came out the door with a shotgun at him once. I mean, there's stories, people. There's so many stories.
I was on the phone with Rick one time, and Dad came by and did something, and Rick hopped in his truck and came over and pick on somebody your own size, and off they went, both of them with guns, and I thought, somebody's going to die tonight. But they didn't. But anyhow, I think that closeness was what made me feel so out of control. And then I had a feeling like somebody had put their arms around me. In my religion, we believe it's the Holy Ghost, the Comforter, and it was as real as if someone had put their arms around me, and I thought, I can do this. And I wasn't falling apart quite so much. But it was such a nice, warm feeling that I knew Heavenly Father and Rick and the Holy Ghost were helping me. And so it was a little better. But I can remember thinking after he died, if I look ahead a week, it's too much. I can't do it for a week. But if I look ahead a minute, and then it got to be I can look ahead an hour, and then eventually you can look ahead a little bit more. At first you just have to be in the moment and think. I had a girlfriend that's husband passed away also that said, I said, "How are you doing, Andrea?" And she says, "I'm proving to myself every day that I can live through this." And you do it because there's no choice. Yeah. I can remember talking to Heavenly Father and saying, please, please, let me wake up and this be a bad dream. I will do anything. I will just let it be a bad dream. And then I can remember thinking, my parents are young enough. They could raise my kids.
Yeah.
I want to go. I don't want to be here. But after a while, you realize that, and it takes such a long time. If I can boob like this at
43 years later,
then it's still tender at times. But after a while, you realize that you have a life, and you can live a life, and you can enjoy a life. But it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's 2 years later. How many years later you met Kendall?
I had an aunt that
That felt like she needed to
oh
intervene.
my gosh, she was relentless. I kept thinking, actually what I thought right at first was, I'm going to live to be 90 years old. I'm going to get cancer, and it's going to take me 10 years to die of cancer. This is how my luck is going. And then I thought, I can just live and raise my kids. I had my other little boy, and the doctor, when he was delivered, said that children that are born under tragic circumstances are often just a joy. And Rick has been.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He is
Most
a
of
joy.
the
And
time.
Grandma loves to repeat that.
Yeah.
That's her favorite thing to say.
Yeah.
He is her shining little boy.
Yep. And they were so good to help me. That, like I said, they were young enough that they helped with everything. And it was about 2.5 years later. It was actually in May when at the Memorial Day races in Parowan that my aunt finally cornered me, my Aunt Penny, and she says, this guy that I've been trying to get you to meet is here now. And I says, Pen, I don't want to meet this guy. I'm good. She says, I know you're a lot better, but you really need to meet this guy. And I says, no, I don't. So I was packing up my stuff and getting ready to leave, and here she comes. This is Kendall, Jan. I want you to meet Kendall. And I loved Kendall from when I first went out with him. Actually, the first time I thought, oh my hell, I had my life all planned. I went through the dating stage and didn't enjoy it that much. I don't want to date again. I don't want to play the games. I don't want to, but we did. We did date. And he was always so good with my children. We got lucky with Kendall. And Penny was nonstop persistent. She knew what kind of a person he was and what we needed, and he has been a savior for me.
We love Kendall.
Yep, he's
We
a
love
pretty good guy.
Kendall at the time had been divorced and had 2 kids, and about same ages as Jeremy and Kim. So you had them, and then Rick,
that was born after Rick died.
and then 10 years later,
we had Alyssa. We
yours,
had one
mine,
together.
and ours.
Yeah, and it's awesome because Kendall didn't actually get to raise his children. He was divorced, and so it was every other weekend, every other holiday, and his ex-wife made things difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult for us, and so he got to raise his children part-time. My children all of the time, but my children were at that point, Jeremy was probably 6.5. Jeremy was older than that. Jeremy was probably 8, 5, and 3 when Kendall and I got together and we got married. And I was petrified. The day that we were setting up for our wedding, his ex-wife had called and asked if they could meet for lunch. And when he left, I says, if this is something that you don't feel really good about doing, just let me know. It is not too late to not do this.
Yeah.
And he came back and he says, nope, we're good. And so we got married, and we've had some interesting moments.
Another lesson in we can do hard things.
Yes.
That's kind of the moral to the life story, though, isn't it? It's just, you never know. Just keep going. You have to just keep going. You think that you're at your end. You think that you are at the most lowest bottom of the bottoms, and that's where you're going to end.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not the end of your story. Your story isn't done yet.
And also to look for the good, the happy, the small blessings. You know, someone one time said, write a gratitude journal. Think of every day there's at least 4 or 5 things that you are thankful for. That I got up this morning. That I didn't beat my children today.
Yes, amen.
There's something that you can be thankful for, and that's what I've found, is that if you look for the sadness, it stays with you. If you try to find the happiness, you can find it.
Yeah. And it becomes easier to find it.
It does, absolutely.
I think when you start setting your sights on those things, they start to make themselves more present.
Yes.
And more easily to...
And you feel the happiness and the gratefulness and you can smile again. And, you know, it wasn't a really long time that I felt that deep, dark, I guess it's all relevant, a couple of years that you felt. But if you just keep looking forward and don't try not to dwell. And you know what? Now I can look at things with Rick and I and laugh. There are some things that bring me to tears every time.
Yeah.
But I can think of the fish flopping on the table and think, you little turd.
Yeah. Yep.
You know? So the joy, Heavenly Father wants us to have joy.
And I think I love that you can talk about him.
Yeah.
Because it helps not only his kids, it helps not only you, but it helps keep him
Alive.
Mm-hmm. That's what was I talking about that earlier? And that it was on my call with my ladies last night. It was people like to tell stories. They like to tell about themselves and talk about themselves because there's no other way that we live on.
Yeah.
Once we're dead,
Yeah.
all we are is memories.
Yeah.
So you have to hope that those memories are being passed down somehow, or that your story's still being told. I would like that.
Yeah.
No one wants to get to the end and think that's just it.
Well, look at Grandpa.
Yeah.
That was his biggest fear.
His biggest fear
My
is that
dad.
we wouldn't remember him.
Yeah. And Rick, family, and maybe it was part of the adoption with Laura and me taking care of someone that wasn't ours, but Rick had a thing about blood, my kids, and he would want that.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Trimmers have that. Mm-hmm. They're very about that.
Yeah. They're very family oriented. And I can't say enough about Kendall. I thought I had found my one true love with Rick.
Yeah.
And Kendall has a saying, which I don't appreciate that much, that is, there's 100 fish in the sea.
Oh, yeah.
You can always find another girl. You can always find another
Yes,
guy.
he liked to tell Rick that.
Yeah.
I heard that he liked to tell Rick that. You can find he would say, I'm sorry, Tiffany, if you ever listen to this, but he would say, you can find a Tiffany with blonde hair.
Yeah.
You can find a Tiffany with brown hair. You can find a Tiffany with red hair.
Yeah.
There's the same person out there. You can find them. You can have exactly what you want.
Yeah. And maybe that comes from his background of going through a rough divorce, you know? I don't know, but...
And having to hope that he could find the one.
And believe me, with yours, mine, and ours, we have had some very interesting experiences, but like I said, he has been so good with my kids. He's better with my kids than I am, because he always says yes. Yes, you can do anything you want. Yes, you can And I'm always the one that says, no, they can't.
Yeah.
But he has been awesome. He has saved me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What is something that you would, I mean, we just went through so many great things and tips for getting through hard times, but if you could look back to young Jan and give her one piece of advice, what would you tell her?
You know, the is it Garth Brooks? The dance?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I think, holy cow, if I would have known what was going to happen, would I want to do all of this? Would I have wanted to marry Rick and go places to where we were so dependent on one another? And yes, I would have, because you would have missed the dance. So live in the moment, take a chance. My Kendall now says I put up walls, and I do, because I get scared of being hurt like that again. But I'm getting better at taking the chances and living life. You need to live life every minute, because I would not change a thing about Rick. I would go with him to Korea. Matter of fact, we had a conversation on a Mars radio call one time that the first time he went over, and he says, man, this country's a little bit rough, Jan. And you had to give the conversation, and then you'd say over, because someone stateside was flipping a switch and listening to your conversation. Well, there was 2 or 3 people. Yeah. Someone in Korea, someone stateside.
The operators.
Yeah. And he says, this is pretty rough. I don't know if you should come. And over. And I says, listen, you son of a bee. How many women do you think would want to come over there? And I am coming over. And we went back and forth. I bet the guys that were listening to this conversation
I bet they loved
it. It was funny, but yeah, I think just spend time with your loved ones. Take the chances. If it doesn't work out, then you're better off. And if it does work out, you're still better off.
Pivot.
So, yeah.
Figure it out.
Yep.
There's not just one right way to do anything.
No, there's
You could be on a path and take a right turn and decide, oh, maybe left would have been better.
But
so then you go left.
Yeah. Yep. And the thing for getting through hard times is, I can remember thinking, this is too overwhelming. I can't do this. But if you take it just in small increments, I can do this for an hour. I can do this for a day. I can do this for a week. Firsts are always hard. First Christmas, first Father's Day. And still to this day, things are hard. But you can get through it.
Yeah.
If you don't look too far ahead.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
Small bites.
Baby steps, yep.
One step at a time. They're cliches for a reason.
Yeah. It's smart people that came up with those.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on here with me and telling your story.
You're welcome.
It's a beautiful story.
I'm such a boob. I've always been a boob. You talk to Rick. He says he gets it from
Rick's
me.
a boob.
Yeah. We are boobs.
She says, I'm going to cry. And Rick says, Gina's mom cried too. And he says, I cried too.
I said, but I'm an ugly crier.
No, that's okay. I appreciate you. I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you.